When I was 21 years old, I joined an organization in Kansas City known as Battery B of the Missouri Battalion of Field Artillery. I couldn't join before I was 21 because my mother and father were afraid I'd have to wear a blue uniform, and I did. And I wore that blue uniform out to see my old grandmother. She looked at me. I thought I looked mighty pretty in that uniform. Said, "Harry, that's the first time a uniform of that color has been in this house since the Civil War. Don't you bring it back." I didn't. You can be sure of that. And then after that, I became a first lieutenant in the organization of the 129th Field Artillery, which came later. I was the first lieutenant in Battery F of the, this is where I was a first lieutenant in Battery F of the 129th Field Artillery, a 75 battery. That picture was taken in France, where we didn't have any equipment here to operate with. We got all our training in France. And after I'd been in France about a month, I was promoted to a captain and made an adjutant of the Field Artillery Regiment to which I belonged, the 129th Field Artillery, and then was put in command of Battery D, and that's the one that caused all the trouble. This is after I became the captain of Battery D, and these are a couple of the lieutenants that were with me in that battery. And that battery had quite an experience. We started out in the Vosges Mountains, and the first barrage we fired was at a German position from what had been a German position. And before we could pull out, the first sergeant was slow getting the horses down. They fired on us, and it wasn't very pleasant. They lit all around, and we found out exactly what it meant to be under fire. Then we moved down to the Meuse-Argonne Drive. Well, we went to Saint-Mihiel first in reserve. Horses stood still with harness on all day that day, but we didn't do any shooting. Then we moved over to the Meuse-Argonne Drive at the Samidou sector, they called it, and there we fired the 26th night of the 26th of September. We fired 3,000 rounds from 4 o'clock until 8 o'clock, and once in a while, he could only have 3 guns because it gets so hot you had to put a wet blanket over it and keep them from melting. When we got through firing that barrage, we hitched up as fast as we could, drove up across the front, and went into position up between Verdun and Cheppy in France. And then fired another barrage that day and fired intermittently all the way through. And while we were in that position, I had a chance to shoot out 3 batteries on the German side. They were firing on our men who were walking down on a prairie plain way up above the river. I'll think of the name of it in a minute, at Verdun. And in doing that, I was firing outside the sector. And the colonel called me up and asked me if I was firing outside the sector. I said, "Yes, Colonel, I just put some German batteries out of business." He says, "You quit firing over there." Well, he was way back, and I knew he'd never get up with me, so I kept on firing and knocked out the other 2 batteries, which paid off in the election of 1948. These were Pennsylvania batteries, and I got into a town just outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania, where 2 of these batteries came from. And if you don't think I carried those 2 towns, you're off your beam, sure enough, because they found out that I was the battery that saved them from getting shot up. Then we stayed in that sector and moved over to Verdun after that, and stayed there until after the war quit.